Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, August the 4th, 2021. Let's talk about birthdays. It is Barack Obama's 60th birthday and Megan Mertz's 40th. And they both have big events planned. Barack's hasn't gone so well. Actually, there's a rumor out there that Megan Mertz was furious because people that she'd invited for her 40 birthday bash said, no, we're going to Obama's instead. You know, he was the president of the United States. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post-Millennial. Former President Barack Obama's 60th birthday party, which is set to take place this weekend on Martha's Vineyard, has been pared down after massive criticism of the star-studded event that was slated to have hundreds of guests. Due to the news spread of the Delta variant over the past week, the President and Mrs. Obama have decided to significantly scale back the event to include only family and close friends, said a spokesperson for Obama, Hannah Hankins, in a statement. President Obama is appreciative of others sending their birthday wishes from afar and looks forward to seeing people soon. Planning for the outdoor event occurred several months ago in accordance with public health guidelines, Hankins added. One person with connections to the Obamas told Axios that the party had 475 confirmed guests, along with 200 plus staff. For the occasion, Oprah Winfrey, Steven Spielberg, and George Clooney were slated to attend the event. The White House said that President Joe Biden would not be able to attend. It seems rather odd, given how Joe is constantly talking about how, he and Barack were like this. White House Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen, told reporters Tuesday that the administration advises everyone to follow public health guidelines, which I know the former president, who is a huge advocate of getting vaccinated, of following the guidance of public health experts, would certainly advocate for himself as well. All attending guests were asked to be vaccinated and show proof of a negative COVID-19 test in a time frame before the event. The party will proceed at the Obama's estate in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, where, according to the Centers for Disease Control, community transmission of coronavirus cases in Duke County, where the island is located, is considered substantial. Democrats are imposing unscientific mask mandates while contemplating more lockdowns. Meanwhile, President Obama is hosting over 500 elites at his Martha's Vineyard mansion. If you or I did that, it would be called a super spreader event by the Democrats, said Representative Elise Stefanik. Typical liberal do as I say, not as I do. This is what socialism looks like, she continued. I don't really know how that looks like socialism. But you've probably heard me remark that I've believed for a long time that would be in the interest of the super elite, the 1% of the 1%, just to dial it down, not to be so ostentatious, not to be so over the top, plutocratic. But no, they don't seem to want to listen to that advice because, what's the point of being on the top of the heap if you can't let everyone know you're on the top of the heap? This is from Martin Robinson at the Daily Mail. Meghan's very woke birthday message. Duchess's 40 by 40 mentoring project gets extra royal approval as Eugenie joins Hollywood's A-listers, helping mothers back to work after a launch video cameo from a juggling Prince Harry. Absolutely hilarious. Meghan Markle marked her 40th birthday by launching 40 by 40, a woman to encourage women back into work. She made the announcement in a video with new friend Melissa McCarthy, shared on the Archie website. Adele, poet Amanda Gorman, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, and fashion designer Stella McCartney all signed up. Prince Harry pops up at the end of the video to show his juggling skills, causing Meghan and Melissa to laugh. Yes. Of course, few people had heard of this woman until a couple of years ago, but now she can command, the best and the brightest to show up for her birthday party, including alleged comedian Melissa McCarthy. At a Zoom-style call in her spotless LA mansion, Meghan told Melissa, because I'm turning 40, I'm asking 40 friends to donate 40 minutes of their time to help mentor a woman who's mobilizing back into the workforce. I wonder how many staff meetings they had for coming up with that stunt. Over 2 million women in the US alone and tens of millions around the world have lost their jobs due to COVID. And I think that if we all do it and commit 40 minutes to some sort of active service, we can create a ripple effect. Melissa repeatedly interrupts Meghan with jokes about other things that she could be doing to celebrate her birthday, leaning on her royal links, suggesting a tea party or a bash on a yacht. At one point, the Duchess laughs when asked, "Are you finally going to do a Suits reunion?" and replies, "Why would I do a Suits reunion for my birthday?" The slick film was made in the same immaculate Montecito study where Harry filmed his recent Apple TV mental health series with Oprah, and Meghan sits at a grand oak desk with a number of pictures of her husband, 2 children, and a strategically placed copies of Meghan's children book, The Bench. Also, a very large healing crystal. Yes, because Meghan Mertz is a thoroughly modern woman, and that's the sort of thing that thoroughly modern women have. So from Princess Eugenie on the net, to celebrate dear Meghan's 40th birthday, I'm contributing 40 minutes of mentorship to support women re-entering the workforce. Happy birthday for women who give everything. We give our time. Are you in? Hashtag 40 by 40. Yes, I'm sure that 40 minutes of mentoring from Princess Eugenie would be pretty fabulous. Meghan or her staff, they want us to know how much they care, In reflecting on my 40th birthday, how pretentious. And the many things I'm grateful for, I'm struck that time is among our greatest and most essential gifts. Time with our loved ones, time doing the things we love, time spent learning, laughing, growing, and the sacred time we have on this earth. Amongst the most valuable gifts of time is also time spent in service to others, knowing that it can contribute to incredible change. Yes, I suppose that's why Meghan Mertz stopped being a working member of the royal family, because that is what they do. Time spent in service to others. But, typically someone like her would be sent to open a Somali youth center in Camberwell or some such place. And that's not as much fun as hanging around with George Clooney, Oprah Winfrey, and Melissa McCarthy. To that last point, and with my 40th lap around the sun in mind, it made me wonder what would happen if we all committed 40 minutes to helping someone or to mentoring someone in need. And then what would happen if we asked our friends to do the same? In the past 2 years, and in large part because of the COVID-19 pandemic, tens of millions of women around the world have left the workforce, including over 2 million women in the US. So many of these women are also shouldering the brunt of the crisis when it comes to unpaid labor. Yes, let's talk about raising children as unpaid labor, including schooling and caring for family members. And the latest research shows that fewer women than men will regain work as we recover from the pandemic. Yes, of course, it would be the worst thing in the world for more women to stay at home and actually raise their children instead of farming that job out to strangers. And oh yes, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is going to be there. I think that alone would make it worthwhile. Don't you think? Megan's, yes, we talked about that. And Megan's mentors to get women back to work could do more harm than good, regardless of how well-meaning they are, warns expert. As she says, Duchess's woke 40th birthday project feels like a publicity stunt. It certainly does. It certainly does. But again, Meghan cares. That's the message. Harry, the ginger waster, is outside juggling balls badly. And no, it's not a metaphor at all. So I always go to the Harry Markle site to find out what a patriotic Briton thinks about all this. And I can see that he is pretty much at the end of his tether. And if he is indicative of supporters of the royal family in Britain, then the royal family is in very serious trouble. He writes, "We the people have silently suffered for more than 3 years while the House of Windsor failed to do its duty. A duty above all to protect the people and the nation. We have had to endure the sovereign praising the enemy and ignoring the clear and present dangers and threats they pose, while others have shouted warnings. The fate of the House of Windsor is in their own hands, yet there was a time when the people would have fought to save it, but those sentiments are sadly in decline. The sovereign fails to understand that loyalty and respect is earned constantly and should never be assumed or taken for granted, as seems to be the case. Many feel betrayed by the sovereign, who appears to be oblivious to the harm and damage caused by traitors who continue on a reign of destruction and terror. They have failed in their duty to protect the nation, and this is why the people are left with no choice but to defend themselves and for the future of the nation. This is why we continue to fight, and fight we shall, for truth and God are on our side, even if our sovereign has appeared to abandon us in our time of need." Many say it is too late. In some respects, I agree, as harm has been caused that can never be erased. Yet this does not stop us fighting to defend ourselves. A weak monarch does not equate to a weak nation, and we will not tolerate being abused and attacked from the enemy within. Should the royal family and the Queen wish to entertain the traitors, then they should face the fact that the House of Windsor is all but a name now with little integrity, and that the Queen has damaged the house of her ancestors, including her beloved father and grandfather. This is her choice, and she may not yet be able to see it, but historians can quite rightly say that she betrayed the legacies of her father and grandfather. In more royal news, there is a cartoon called The Prince, which has just begun on HBO Max. Does anyone have HBO Max? It was my understanding that it was a bust. This is according to Insider.com. In The Prince, the new HBO Max cartoon about the royal family, Kate Middleton is an alcoholic, Camilla's mute, and Prince Harry doesn't know what a fridge is. When it comes to The Prince, the new satirical HBO Max cartoon about the royal family, nothing is off limits. The controversial show, which was inspired by Gary Janetti's Instagram account and features voice acting by Orlando Bloom and Sophie Turner, doesn't hold back. It takes jabs at everything from Kate Middleton and Prince William's marriage to Prince Harry's relationship with his son, whose name Harry can't seem to remember. The Prince follows Middleton and William's 8-year-old son, Prince George, on quests such as getting Kelly Ripa to follow him on Instagram and becoming a star on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which the show's Meghan Markle joins when she can't land a real acting gig. Throughout the 12 episodes, which were released Thursday, George tortures his sweet butler Owen, can't stand his younger sister Charlotte, and constantly sucks up to the Queen. Middleton hates her sister-in-law and is often seen guzzling a glass of wine, or 5. "Excuse me, I'm late for an appointment," Middleton says in one scene. "I didn't think the pubs were open yet," William replies. "I have a haircut, if you must know. That's when somebody takes scissors and cuts your hair, in case you forgot," she shoots back Yes, and of course, Prince Philip is shown as a drooling imbecile in the show. I don't often agree with royal watcher Omid Scobie, but he says royals have been parodied on dozens of shows over the years, Spitting Image, The Windsors, SNL, etc. But this is the first time I can recall children being targeted, which I think is really the point here. Let's go to the chat. Anne Run, Picasso 88, Dan Allison, Super Spreader Events, Steve, Joe's too busy running the country, raucous laughter follows. Hello to William Hicks. Chokokin666 says, made the mistake of Vax arguing on Instagram. The counter arguments were circular and absurdly invalid. It really is a study in coercive public relations, aka propaganda. Pelpicasso 88 says, I was out walking today and saw a smoking hot young Asian woman. Incredible body, but covered in tats, legs, arms, back. What a shame. William Hicks says, hey, who's up for a trip to New York City? The Big Apple, with all those restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues. Yippee skippy. Mayor de Blasio is promoting his town like crazy. There's an editorial in the New York Post yesterday, just one day after recognizing how needless a new mask mandate is and how harmful it'd be to the city's recovery, Mayor Bill de Blasio caved and came up with something that could prove seriously damaging to Gotham's still struggling small businesses, a mandate requiring proof of COVID vaccination to enter any of them. If you want to participate in society fully, you've got to get vaccinated, His Honor declared Tuesday, as he announced that those entering indoor bars and restaurants, fitness facilities, and entertainment venues would have to show proof of inoculation, whether worker or customer. He's launching the mandate, the nation's first, on August the 16th, and starting enforcement September the 13th. Let's be clear, the Post has always been in favor of vaccination being the only true way out of this crisis, but we can't help but think this will be more bad news for the overworked and understaffed hospitality industry, which is still reeling from ridiculous pandemic regulations. Businesses will now have to turn away customers if they enforce the mandate, and de Blasio is putting the onus on them to do so. Yet there's no guarantee, of course, that some people won't counterfeit Vax cards to get around the restriction. Well, of course, the next step would be onerous fines for people who has been found guilty of having bootleg vaccination cards. Jokin666 says the de Blasio rule violates so many principles, constitutional, medical, war crimes tribunals, etc., yet it will be implemented. Also, please visit me in New York City. I'll be the depressed one. Who else do we have here? Jim Bowden says 42 days in effing lockdown here in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to this dystopian clown world, KMG. Seven Costanza says, are there any cities left in the U.S. where women aren't covered in tats? I've given this a lot of thought, and I can see that some women are seeking to maximize their appeal to a certain type of man if they get tattoos. But of course, they are also greatly diminishing their charisma because they become a boutique enthusiasm, because to this day, most men find tattoos on women to be repugnant. Metal Mike says it's okay. The new Queen of Canada has ordered a cease and desist order on all COVID restrictions. Have you seen this madness? Must be a ceases a distraction. And let's talk about real estate. Let's talk about from Hong Kong to your town. That apparently homes, particularly single-family detached dwellings, are very 20th century. They're really only for the rich people. Instead, we're all going to be asked to live like people in Hong Kong do, just stacked higher and higher and higher in the sky. Pedro Gonzalez writes in Chronicles, there is a storm on the horizon. Rootless corporations, major financial institutions, and the federal government are poised to fundamentally change the way Americans live by separating them from property ownership. The peculiar conjunctures of our time are paving a winding road to villainage, with each new turn bringing to clearer view the future of rent serfdom awaiting most Americans. As the nation locked down last year, rent protections that continue today sheltered tenants from eviction. Independent of intentionality, these measures kneecapped mom-and-pop landlords, individuals who are more likely to own single units, homes, and duplexes. The long-term concern here, over the course of a few years, is that a growing share of mom-and-pop landlords will be forced to sell and rents will go up, says Peter Hepburn, assistant professor of sociology at Rutgers. There's a lot of private equity interest and a real possibility of growing consolidation. Many smaller landlords report vulture-like solicitations to sell from major real estate firms waiting to swoop down on the carcass. With more than 6 million renter households behind on rent, they feel as if the system is stacked against them, and for good reason. Accompanying eviction moratoriums last year was the CARES Act. Americans took home stimulus checks, but wealthy hedge fund investors and real estate firms silently reaped billions in tax breaks, while mom-and-pop landlords received comparatively little assistance. Among the financial giants that have taken a renewed interest in real estate is BlackRock, the world's largest money manager. It seems very strange when you wake up one day and it would appear that the United States is being run by BlackRock and Pfizer. They're the ones making the decisions now. Gonzalez continues, BlackRock is powerfully connected both in America and abroad. It recently became the first global asset manager licensed to start a wholly owned onshore mutual fund business in China. Domestically, Chief Executive Larry Fink has raised a shadow government of former Treasury Department officials to insulate BlackRock from regulators. The firm's influence is felt everywhere. It has recently dipped into progressive politics by using its voting power to compel Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods, and Kroger to stop selling or severely restrict the sale of firearms and ammunition. BlackRock has practically enacted a de facto form of gun control. In April, it announced a racial audit to determine how it may have contributed to racial inequities in the financial system. According to the Urban Institute, home ownership is already expected to decline over the next 2 decades, fueled by higher prices pushing more people toward renting. Now, ordinary Americans are increasingly competing for a roof over their heads against the permanent capital of companies such as BlackRock and JP Morgan Asset Management, which are buying single-family homes from real estate developers at double what the middle class can afford. Indeed, the country's largest home builders are betting on America becoming a nation of renters, pouring billions into the built-to-rent sector with the backing of banks and private investment firms. Entire neighborhoods are gobbled up as the stage is set for what John Burns Real Estate Consulting is calling another speculative investor-driven home price bubble. The firm estimates that 1 in every 5 houses sold in many of the nation's top markets is bought by someone who will never move in. In other words, as a speculative investment often made by financial firms. Similarly, data from the Redfin real estate brokerage firm shows investors bought about 1 of every 7 homes in the first quarter of 2021. There's even an emergent Silicon Valley to Wall Street pipeline in which private equity firms work with tech companies to buy homes before the public ever lays eyes on them. Well, you know, a similar thing happened in London when Boris Johnson was mayor, that we need more homes, which means boxes stacked ever higher in the sky. And there was one of those famous or infamous private-public partnerships where a bunch of Chinese firms got involved or Russians got involved, and Britons were not even offered a chance at any of these dwellings. Back to Chronicles. Neoliberal media outlets like Vox have attempted to dispel concerns over Wall Street's role in financializing home ownership, which is the foundation of the middle class. The solution, they say, is for Americans to get over their bigotry and love of open spaces and marry mass immigration with mass real estate development, turning American residential areas into stack and pack metropolises home to 1 billion atomized consumers. Of course, William E. Ford, chief executive of General Atlantic, Fox's major stakeholder, also happens to be on the board of BlackRock. Meanwhile, some hail the rise of new forms of ownership in fractional ownership models, wherein people would own stock in entities that hold commercial and residential properties in their area. But this is nominal ownership, neighborhood real estate investment trusts given in exchange for the financialization and further managerialization of the body politic. Others point the finger at the Federal Reserve as the party responsible for these trends. Capital, they say, is merely capitalizing on cheap mortgage financing, but this misses a salient point. Institutions like BlackRock and the Fed are joined at the hip. As the market strained amid the pandemic last year, Chief of the Federal Reserve Jerome Powell and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin were in close contact with Fink at BlackRock. In March, Mnuchin held scores of calls on the eve of the Fed's unveiling of a policy package featuring its first ever program to buy corporate bonds. BlackRock was selected to purchase agency commercial mortgage-backed securities secured by multifamily home mortgages on behalf of the Fed. In other words, a private firm was charged with implementing the government's pandemic response. By January 2021, the Biden administration had selected several BlackRock alumni for posts: Brian Dees, Adewale Wale Adeyemo, and Michael Powell. Dees previously served as BlackRock's global head of sustainable investing and was chosen to head the National Economic Council. Adeyemo, Fink's former interim chief of staff, was named Janet Yellen's top deputy at the Treasury Department. Powell, BlackRock's global chief investment strategist and an Obama administration veteran, joined as chief economic advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris. Dees played a part in dismantling the American automotive industry, while Powell served as BlackRock's media mouthpiece. In the background of all this, the Biden administration declared war on the suburbs, setting its sights on single-family zoning. Its killing machine is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The first shot was fired with the reinstating of an Obama-era fair housing rule, temporarily undone under former President Donald Trump. Its purpose is to enforce the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which had already undermined constitutional property protections. The new rule to affirmatively further fair housing gives its lethal teeth. Euphemistically put by HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, the rule will require every local government that accepts federal housing dollars to make concrete and meaningful commitments toward affirmatively furthering fair housing. Plainly put, communities that don't comply with the racial equity agenda by refusing to allow high-rise apartments, low-income housing, and high-density zoning in their neighborhoods will lose billions in federal funding. Under this thinking, a safe, clean community is a symptom of the disease of structural racism. Blighting it with the squalor and anomie of the city is the cure. Someone in USA Today comments, "A house with a white picket fence, boo, and a big backyard for 4th of July barbecue may be a staple of the American dream, but experts and local politicians say multifamily zoning is key to combating climate change, racial injustice, and the nation's growing affordable housing crisis." The why for Democrats is obvious. They win elections in cities, especially in big cities. That is the iron law of politics for our time. Bringing the city to where you live means increasing their electoral power. The annihilation of single-family zoning would also provide a boon for corporations and investment firms that are now in the business of buying up neighborhoods and consolidating properties into rentals. Areas traditionally zoned for single-family housing would, luckily for Wall Street, be invaded by apartment buildings and multifamily units. While investors have been buying more single-family homes during the pandemic, they still have the biggest market share in the multifamily sector, according to Redfin. Gonzalez concludes, the Romans, Machiavelli noted, saw problems from afar, and these trends have coalesced to form brooding storm clouds on the horizon. Cynics, ideologues, and capital are forming a front, aided by the zeitgeist and farce of anti-racism. Yet few sound the alarm, and fewer still have a response apart from downplaying or even celebrating our becoming a nation of renters. And of course, we have a very similar problem in Canada, and the jackals have started to move in. But there's a piece today by Tristan Hopper in the National Post, which actually shocked me because it looks at housing becoming affordable and mentions immigration. Yes, I know, incredible, right? The number one reason you will never be able to afford a house in Canada, everything should be better. We could easily fix housing affordability with more houses. Here's why: it's illegal. Canadians are more priced out of their markets than Americans, Brits, or even Singaporeans. This is mostly a function of the simple fact that we have fewer homes per capita than any other country in the G7. If you are a Canadian, you live in a country that is technically big enough to give you 68 acres of land to yourself. That's big enough to fit roughly 2/3 of Disneyland. On top of that, if you neatly divided up all of Canada's forests, we'd have about 9,000 trees each. I don't really like these comparisons because most of Canada is frozen wasteland. That's why people live close to the American border. Given this, you would assume that we would all have our personal longhouse. Instead, we Canadians are in the ironic situation living in one of the most unaffordable countries for real estate on the entire planet. And there's a picture here, a Google Street View image of 1912 William Street, a Vancouver property listed in May for $249,000. The property, which is a 9-foot by 60-foot micro lot, consists of a gravel driveway with a shed at the back. Hopper writes, "It's not great that we have boatloads of foreign capital turning our urban cores into a financial product. It's also not tremendously helpful when each year brings some new tax or regulation to drive up construction costs. But if I was to pick one overarching reason why you can't afford a house in 21st century Canada, it would be this. There's an entire latticework of laws in this country to artificially constrict the supply of homes and make it illegal for you to build a reasonable place to live." I'm talking about zoning laws. Here's a map of Vancouver, the city where a dilapidated shed will cost you $300,000. All of those yellow parts are where it's illegal to build more dense than a duplex. Well, again, we need more houses in Canada, but that's because we don't have an immigration moratorium. And frankly, I don't think that stacking them up in the sky is a solution to this. People who live in Vancouver, they tend to claim, how much they love the environment. But the fact for their love of immigration and their love of sprawl has meant that everything from Squamish to the American border has been paved over. That so-called, Metro Vancouver or Greater Vancouver is one of the biggest urban conglomerations in the world. Why does nobody trust anybody anymore? Or why does one half of the population not trust the other half or not trust the elite? Well, someone called Konstantin Kisin attempted to explain. You're struggling to understand why some people are vaccine hesitant. The "let me help you" megathread. Imagine you're a normal person. The year is 2016. Rightly or wrongly, you believe most of what you see in the media. You believe polls are broadly reflective of public opinion. You believe doctors and scientists are trustworthy and independent. You're a decent, reasonable person who follows the rules and trusts authority. Imagine your shock then when Brexit, which you were assured won't happen because it's a fringe movement led by racists for racist, happens. The polls, which widely predicted it wouldn't happen, were completely wrong. The experts and media pundits who told you it wouldn't happen day after day are also wrong. Oh well, you say, these things happen. Imagine that soon after Donald Trump is running for president, you are told by your favorite media publications that he is going to lose. Some experts say his opponent has a 99% chance of winning. Imagine waking up on the morning after the election to discover that pollsters, media experts, and politicians you still trusted were wrong again. And now the racist monster they told you would never get near the White House is the leader of the free world. How did this happen, you ask yourself? How could all the people in charge of informing me be so wrong? It was the Russians, they tell you. The Russians did Brexit and they got Trump elected too. Imagine that for the next 3.5 years, you watch as the media and the political class run with the Russia collusion narrative. They tell you the how, when, and where. The dossiers, the whistleblowers, the peeing prostitutes. Imagine your desperation for things to make sense again. The Mueller report is coming and it will set your world straight. Evidence of foreign meddling in the 2016 election and Brexit is coming to save your unsettled mind. Imagine your shock then when you discover that Brexit and Trump had little to do with foreign meddling. The screaming about Russians and Brexit dies down as well. Imagine that bit by bit, you discover that events which the media and political class told you would not and could not happen, not only happened, but happened without some sort of evil interference. Instead, millions of your fellow citizens voted for them. Again, you ask, how could this happen? And again, the media has the answer: racism. Your country is racist, they tell you. If you're white, this seems strange to you. Other than a handful of idiots, you've never met a racist. If you're an ethnic minority immigrant like me, this seems even stranger. Why would people in one of the most welcoming, tolerant countries in the world want to convince themselves their country is racist when it's so obviously not? But the evidence is right there on your TV screen. Imagine your horror as a gay black actor is assaulted by MAGA hat-wearing thugs who racially abuse him and put a noose around his neck. He cries while talking about it. Imagine your outrage as you see news reports of a bunch of MAGA hat-wearing kids from a religious school contemptuously confront a Native American elder. Reza Aslan tells you the kid has a punchable face. And while you abhor violence, it's hard to disagree. Imagine that for days you watch coverage of these events with expert after expert, pundit after pundit, sharing and fueling your outrage about them. With every word, your belief that you are a good person and that your country is a good country wavers. Imagine that soon after that, however, the Jussie Smollett story turns out to be an attention-seeking hoax. Imagine that you quickly discover that the Native American elder was the one who confronted the kids and not the other way around. If this is such a racist country, you ask yourself, why would they need to make up stories of racism? As you ponder this, you remember that for years now, you've been expected to go along with other make-believe. You're expected to believe that whether you're male or female is not as simple as you once thought. Whatever you learned about biology at school is wrong. You no longer know how many genders there are, and it seems dangerous to try to find out. Imagine reading that the experts at the American Psychological Association say that traditional masculinity is pathological and harmful. Imagine that you still want to believe the media and their experts, but now that requires you to think your country is racist, men are bad, and gender is a social construct, whatever that means. It is at this point that a pandemic emerges on the other side of the world. You are initially unconcerned, but as scenes emerge from Italy and other countries, it is clear that something big is happening. You watch nervously as politicians give press conference after press conference, flanked by experts to explain the situation. The racist Donald Trump shuts down travel from China. In response, the mayor of Florence advises citizens to fight racism by hugging a Chinese person. Shortly after, Nancy Pelosi, a respected Democrat, visits Chinatown in San Francisco to explain there's no reason tourists or locals should be staying away from the area because of coronavirus concerns. Thank God there are some sensible, non-racist people who aren't overreacting, you say to yourself. Imagine watching as Trump doubles down on his racism, but by claiming the virus may have come from a lab in Wuhan. Nonsense, you think to yourself, as you wonder how best to protect yourself and your family from this deadly disease. You consider getting masks. You've seen visitors from Asian countries wear them. But the UK's chief medical officer tells you not to wear a mask and wash your hands instead. As lockdowns are introduced around the world, you diligently follow all the rules. You stay at home, only go out once, and live off savings or government grants. You are proud to be doing your part. Thanks to you and millions of your fellow citizens, the first wave of the pandemic does not overwhelm the healthcare system. While thousands sadly die, you've helped to protect the NHS. Imagine your confusion as the same people who have spent 3 months telling you masks don't work and that you shouldn't wear them introduce mask mandates. We're following the science, they tell you. This makes little sense, but a pandemic is no time for questions. As you cautiously go to the supermarket, you notice that masks have made people far less likely to social distance. You remember reading somewhere that bicycle helmets work similarly. They give the wearer more confidence, and the result is more accidents and injuries, not fewer. Silly people, you say to yourself. If only they would follow government advice. You turn on your TV to learn that shoppers at your local supermarket aren't the only ones who have been ignoring the rules. Neil Ferguson, the man whose projections were used as the basis for lockdowns, appears to have broken his own rules to get some action with his married lover. Boris Johnson's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, drove halfway across the country to ensure he had a better place to isolate. The journalists who berate him for this are later found to have attended a birthday party in breach of the rules. The lockdown continues. However, a man is killed in Minneapolis while being arrested for a petty crime. The man is black, the officer is white. The arrest is captured on video and quickly goes viral around the world. Imagine your horror as you watch an officer of the law kneel on a man's neck until he passes out and later dies. This is disgusting, you say to yourself. I hope they throw the book at him. Overnight, a huge campaign for racial justice springs up around the world. No one explains what racism had to do with the incident, but they don't need to. As you know by now, the West is racist, and therefore, anytime a white person does anything bad to a black person, there can only be one explanation. The fact that an identical incident happened to a white man called Tony Timpa is never mentioned for context. While the lockdown rules remain in place, the protests against injustice spill out onto the streets. Tens of thousands of people crowd into major cities. Few wear masks and social distancing is non-existent. Clashes with police ensue, and in America, protesters loot stores, attack residents, and start fires. A retired black police officer called David Dorn is among dozens of people who were murdered in the chaos. The media describe these events as mostly peaceful protests as the reporters stand in front of burning buildings. After months of harsh restrictions, the media and political class offer no criticism of protests which violate every element of lockdown. After months of telling you to stay at home to avoid spreading COVID, doctors explain that rather than being a mass COVID spreading event, protest is a profound public health intervention. Big tech companies go into overdrive to stop the spread of disinformation. All discussions of alternative points of view regarding the efficacy of masks and lockdowns, as well as the origins of the virus, are censored. Attempts to discuss the negative impact on lockdown on health and mental well-being are suppressed. As the year runs on with a pivotal American election looming, President Trump promises a huge push to develop a vaccine. Kamala Harris, who was later elected vice president, says that she would not take the vaccine if Trump told her to. On the eve of the election, a publication in America releases a damaging report about Hunter Biden, son of presidential candidate Joe Biden. The story alleges corruption, which may involve his father, as well as drug taking, use of prostitutes, and more. Twitter and other social media companies prevent the story from being shared. The media lines up commentators to claim the story was Russian disinformation. Once his father wins the election, it becomes clear that several key elements of the story are likely accurate, and the laptop from which the information was recovered is, in fact, Hunter Biden's laptop. Meanwhile, the number of COVID patients and deaths turns out to have been wrong. For some time, anyone who died at any point after a positive COVID test was counted as dying of COVID, even if they have been killed by a drunk driver. Now that racist Donald Trump is no longer president, closing borders is no longer considered xenophobic and is widely advocated for in the media. The racist conspiracy theory that the virus came from a lab is now also allowed to be discussed and appears likely to be the most credible explanation of the origins of the virus. Imagine your horror as you learned that the reason thousands of people died in the first wave of the pandemic was that elderly patients with COVID were allowed to be released back into care homes. This is especially true in the UK and in New York, run by Governor Andrew Cuomo, brother of CNN anchor Chris Cuomo. Governor Cuomo's publisher suspends promotion of his books about leadership during the pandemic amid the inquiry into nursing home deaths. Meanwhile, Texas and Florida, which remained open, continue to thrive. In the UK, the health secretary, the person responsible for saving lives, is found to be cheating on his wife with a married aide in breach of social distancing rules. The man making the rules for you does not follow them. It is at this point that the vaccine, which you were initially told would need to be given to the vulnerable before restrictions are lifted, becomes the main drive of government policy and media commentary. The same people who told you Brexit would never happen, Trump would never win, that when he did win, it was because of Russian collusion, then because of racism, that you must follow lockdowns while they don't, that masks don't work and then they do, that protests during lockdowns are a health intervention, that ransacking Black communities in the name of fighting racism are mostly peaceful, that Jussie Smollett was a victim of a hate crime, that men are toxic, that there was an infinite number of genders, that COVID didn't come from a lab, and then it probably did, that closing borders is racist, and then it's the most important thing to do, that the Hunter Biden story is Russian disinformation, then it's not, that they would not take Trump's vaccine, and then that you must take the vaccine, that Governor Cuomo is a great COVID leader, and then that he is a granny killer, that the number of COVID deaths is one thing and then another, that hospitals are filled with COVID patients, and that many of them caught COVID in hospital. These same people are now telling you the vaccine is safe. You must take it, and if you don't, you will be a second-class citizen. Understand vaccine hesitancy now. P.S. How do I know these things? I have a YouTube show at TriggerPod where we have honest conversations with people who can actually explain why things are happening, why Brexit happened, why people voted for Trump, BLM, COVID, etc. Check it out. And this is from a thread reader from, again, this is Konstantin Kisin, and he is at Twitter at Konstantin Kisin with one S and not two. Tucker Carlson, who was recently in Budapest, is not very happy with the Anglosphere. He said on his show this week, if you care about Western civilization and democracy and families and the ferocious assault on all three of those things by the leaders of our global institutions, you should know what is happening here right now, but more on that to come. First tonight, though, we're continuing to follow the bizarre and very fast-changing guidance on COVID from the White House. Remember then they told you the last administration was incompetent? We've never seen anything like this. It is beyond belief. And he goes on to talk about Rochelle Walensky, who, of course, famously cried when she was introduced as a CDC director, moaning how scared she was. It's exactly the sort of tough person you want to be in charge of public health during an epidemic. Tucker Carlson goes on to talk about CNN anchors lying for politicians who are breaking their own rules. And then he says the Anglosphere are committing suicide collectively. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, and Great Britain, what do they have in common? They speak the same language, they have the same culture, and all of them are allowing COVID to defeat them. In Australia, people are not allowed on the beach and not allowed to ask why either. We know that because Sky News Australia, which is the same owners as this channel, has just been banned on YouTube in Australia. Why is that? And I can't repeat that, okay? Because I will likely be banned as well. But you get the point. I have been pointing out for weeks and weeks and weeks, that the group of people in the United States who are least likely to get the jab are Black people. Whereas the media keeps telling you that no, it's evil white Christians and Republicans. But it seems that Blacks in the United States are about to flex their political muscle over this question, which puts the powers that be in a hilarious quandary. This is from WCVB5. Boston Mayor Kim Janey compares vaccine passports to slave papers and birtherism. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. When Janie was asked her opinion on the idea of everyone getting vaccinated, she expressed that her administration wants to encourage vaccination, but did not explicitly say whether she would consider implementing a similar policy to that of New York's. We want to make sure that we're giving every opportunity for folks to get vaccinated. When it comes to what businesses may choose to do, we know that those types of things are difficult to enforce when it comes to vaccine. There's a long history in this country of people needing to show their papers, she said. During slavery, post-slavery, as recent as you know what immigration population has to go through here, we heard Trump with a birth certificate nonsense. Here we want to make it sure that we are not doing anything that would further create a barrier for residents of Boston or disproportionately impact BIPOC communities. Now, yes. Yeah, that's going to get ugly. It's going to get ugly in a hurry. This is from Jesse O'Neill at the New York Post. The FDA is ramping up its timeline to fully approve Pfizer-BioNTech's two-shot COVID vaccine amid the surge of infections gripping much of the U.S. Health officials have an unofficial deadline of Labor Day or sooner to fully approve the manufacturer's vaccine, which is now one of 3 approved on an emergency basis in the U.S. That accelerated timetable would require an all-hands-on-deck approach to greenlight the vaccine several weeks before President Biden's stated goal of early fall, the report said. Suppose that the results that they get are not good, or even worse than we're seeing now. Are they just going to go ahead and give it full approval anyway? Well, I suppose they do. I can commend a book to you called Bad Pharma, which I reviewed on the old book club a couple of years ago. Essentially, what the health authorities in the United States do is they simply take the drug companies at their word. If the drug company says that a new drug is both efficacious and safe, the FDA says, well, you're the ones who did the studies, so you must know what you are talking about. Of course, one doesn't need to give much thought to this to realize that if a drug company has invested, say $1 billion in a new drug, that it is not likely to report to the government, there's serious problems with this. In fact, it is neither safe nor efficacious, so we're just dropping the whole project. No, that is not going to happen. There's simply too much money in it. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki had this to say about 2 American governors. DeSantis and Abbott need to get out of the way. It's a strange thing. When Donald Trump was president, there were a great many people accusing him of being a dictator. Then with regard to COVID, they complained because he was not acting as a dictator. That is to say, mayors and governors have the primary responsibility for public health in the United States. But Jen Psaki isn't having it. They need to get out of the way. I wonder how far the Biden administration is going to push this, because there's already talk of secession in the United States. And if the Biden administration attempts a medical takeover of Texas and Florida, I don't think that would go very well for them. Scientific journal paper suggests making it a federal hate crime to criticize Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is Natalie Winters at the National Pulse. A scientific journal article authored by Professor Peter Hotez, a frequent guest on corporate media networks, called to, quote, extend federal hate crime protections for scientists facing criticism from alleged far-right extremists, unquote, including National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director Anthony Fauci. So to return to the status justice of the Middle Ages, They had a word for that, lèse-majesté, that you cannot criticize your betters. You go to prison, or worse. There is a troubling new expansion of anti-science aggression in the United States is arising from far-right extremism. The paper published in the peer-reviewed Public Library of Science Biology Journal begins. A band of ultra-conservative members of the U.S. Congress and other public officials with far-right leanings are waging organized and seemingly well-coordinated attacks against prominent U.S. biological scientists. In parallel, conservative news outlets repeatedly and purposefully promote disinformation designed to portray key American scientists as enemies. There's a hilarious graphic in this paper. Okay. 1, 2, 3 across the top, squares, circle at the bottom. Conservative outlets pushing, U.S. Congress, far-right American pushing, conservative public intellectuals pushing aggression against science or U.S. scientists. It really has become a religion. It really has become a religion. Hotez even draws comparisons to the intentions of the Trump administration and its American first allies to those of Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Marxists, and Leninists. Yes. As always, it's the exact opposite of the truth. And going back to Kissinger, why we're supposed to believe any of these people? They are the maxers and the maskers and the vaccinators. They're about this close from openly advocating for the death of people who disagree with them. This is from Frankie Stocks at National File. The far-left Daily Kos news blog labeled unvaccinated Americans, quote, domestic terrorists, unquote, and called for them to be arrested and put, quote, under house detention wearing ankle monitors, unquote, in a recent article published to the site pushing Joe Biden and Democrat lawmakers to institute vaccine passport mandates and vaccine passport programs. Trumpster elected officials, media celebrities, and dead-end Trumpsters, wrote Mark Carlin, would be ideally confined to their homes, forced to wear an ankle monitor until they became vaccinated. Just, yes, the vaccine is so good, we're going to have to punish you with it. Yes, that also rather explains vaccine hesitancy. Does it not? And we have much, much more of this. Hysterical piece in Barron's by Arthur Kaplan and Dorit Rice. This Kaplan fellow is referred to as a bioethicist. Yes, he's professor of bioethics. As Thomas Fleming once pointed out, there's no such thing as bioethics. There are just ethics. And the founding head of New York University School of Medicine's Division of Medical Ethics. I've seen pieces by this fellow in the past, and they are, without exception, sinister. The authors begin, the unvaccinated in the United States are imposing costs and harms on the rest of us. They are, as they incessantly point out, free to choose not to vaccinate, but they should pay for their poor choices that hurt others. COVID-19 continues to rage throughout the United States, harming and killing people. Daily deaths spiked to 33% last week, as recorded by the CDC. But as the virus surges again, the distribution of damage has changed, is now overwhelmingly killing and harming the unvaccinated. Yeah, really? Really? You're going to stick with that line, are you? An analysis by the Kaiser Family Foundation put the rate of breakthrough cases at well under 1% for the fully vaccinated. A natural option is to require those who choose not to vaccinate or mask and infect others to pay the cost. We routinely impose costs on those who harm others by failing to take precautions. We impose costs on drivers who don't stop at stoplights, campers who are not careful and cause fires, and homeowners who don't shovel snow from the sidewalks. And this rant goes on. Choices have consequences. Personal responsibility matters. Does it now? Really? It matters in the medical community in the United States? Not bloody likely. Want to reject expert opinion and the established facts about COVID and put yourself and others at risk? Then you should pay if your choice harms others. Let's see. Yes, Chris Cuomo, Fredo, did not want to talk about his brother on CNN yesterday. So instead, he raved about Florida and Texas. Yes, that these people must be forced into doing what is best for them. Must be forced because it's so good for you. And of course, Canadians are, well, the Canadian elite is on board with this because of course they would be, because that's just the kind of people Canadian elites are. Bring on the vaccine passports and bottoms up. Yep, we're all going to be forced to be jabbed. This woman, Tasha Karedin, engages in some rather disturbing language, at least disturbing to me. It's a demonization of people. What is it? Petri dishes? Is that what we're called? Yes. Only 55% of Alberta's population is fully vaccinated, and Premier Kenney expects that 10% will not take the vaccine, no matter what. This leaves millions of people as living Petri dishes, able to host the virus and allow it to potentially mutate into a more dangerous strain. This past week, the CDC declared the Delta variant to be 1,000 times as contagious as the original SARS-CoV-2 virus, capable of causing breakthrough infections in vaccinated persons who can then spread it to others. So the vaccines are not preventing people from being infected by the dreaded Delta variant, but we all must get it anyway. This is truly what they call circular logic. Dr. Dina Hinshaw, who is the chief medical officer of the province of Alberta, she actually wrote in the National Post today, "We need to learn to live with COVID without extraordinary measures." Because virus gonna virus, as Alex Berenson says. Hinshaw writes, "We will not eliminate COVID, which means we need to learn how to live with it. Testing every person with a runny nose or sore throat is an extraordinary measure that we cannot sustain, particularly through the respiratory virus season. Legally mandating everyone to stay home for 10 days if they have any symptoms is also an extraordinary measure. It was necessary before vaccines, but it is also incredibly disruptive. It could only be justified when the risk was unchecked by vaccine protection. I know the vast majority of Albertans do not want to knowingly inflict harm on others. I believe that for those that test positive for COVID-19, knowing that staying home is the way to protect others and is the right thing to do will be enough for them to take that action." This is not how Tasha Karedin, who was in the past considered one of Canada's leading conservatives, yes. And she concludes, "We live in a free country. People have the right to get vaccinated or not, but their choice should not take away the choices of others, and politics shouldn't either. Bring on the passports and bottoms up." Yes, this woman is obviously terrified of getting COVID-19 despite the fact that she has been fully vaccinated, which should tell something to her that's important about the situation, but no, it doesn't. And in more confusing news, the World Health Organization calls for a halt to COVID-19 booster shots, doses needed to address shortfall in poor countries, agency says. Let's go back to the chat. William Hicks, choices have consequences. Who knew? Well, if you look at the flip-flopping of the U.S. medical establishment that's been going on since, January of last year, if choices had consequences, these people wouldn't have their jobs. If choices has consequences, Governor Cuomo would be in prison, serving the rest of his life in prison. Oscar Toe says that's a hell of an argument the left is using. Spreading a damn virus is now against American freedom now. ContraCoo says it's shocking because it doesn't seem like they realize the implications of what they are suggesting, either in the short-term harm to their fellow citizens or the long-term backlash. Again, from ContraCoo, we're probably only a decade away from gulags at this rate. Well, as the Babylon Bee joked, and I'm sure David A. French would appreciate this, if Facebook runs the gulags, it's not the government doing it, so you can't complain. She was never a conservative. She was always a Kim Campbell, Jean Charest progressive conservative, says Metal Mike. Yes, I suppose that's true enough. But of course, she wrote a book. She wrote a book called Uniting the Right or something like that. What counts as being the right in Canada? Well, I don't know, anyone who doesn't believe, in Stalinist dictatorship. Don Willis says, I would like to see a public execution channel on all basic cable offerings. Maybe it will come to that. Old Major says, Hotez is just a rent seeker. ContraCoo again, Mark Dice had a joke video where he canvassed people to sign a petition to incarcerate any unvaccinated person. The number of people who enthusiastic signed it was shocking. Okay. Cuomo probably killed some elite's grandmother in his nursing home debacle, says Caligula 138. Josh Randall disavow says, shout out to Faith Goldie lurking chat. What, really? I haven't heard from Faith for quite a long time. KMG has a Ukraine bride staying quiet in the restroom. No, actually, I don't. I'm all on my Todd here. Hello to Texas Feral Hog. And let's move on here. Again, politics has become medicine and medicine has become politics. Oh, the people who are saying things that we disagree with, they're the evil Trumpists who are trying to end democracy. This from a group of people who applauded the President of the United States being banned from electronic communication across all platforms. Yes, the sitting President of the United States banned from social media. And Trump is the one who's trying to destroy democracy. This is Paul Joseph Watson. At Summit News, Queensland's top health official has warned grandparents don't go anywhere near your grandkids, as Australia continues to struggle with its highly controversial zero COVID policy, which has necessitated endless lockdowns. And New York, of course, as mentioned previously, will be the first in nation to require proof of vaccination for indoor restaurants, gyms, and shows. Oh, do we have a quotation from that creep de Blasio? I mean, who's the more obnoxious, him or Cuomo? Actually, Cuomo, I guess. De Blasio is kind of stupid looking, man, but Cuomo has the eyes of a killer. Yeah, here we go. This is a miraculous place, literally filled with wonders. De Blasio said of the city, if you're vaccinated, that's going to open up to you. You can open the door. If you're unvaccinated, you will be able to participate in many things. It's time for people to see vaccination as necessary to living a good, full, and healthy life. Someone wanted me to talk about the Market Ticker website. You can go there, market-ticker.org. I'm not even going to mention the man's name that writes it because it'll almost certainly get me banned. But he makes a very strong argument, in my opinion, about what is going on with the Delta variant and so-called leaky vaccines. So, yeah, I will talk about this because it's a CNN. And I can quote CNN without getting banned. This is from Mick Creever. An analysis by British academics published in the UK government's official scientific advisory group says that they believe it is almost certain that a SARS-CoV-2 variant will emerge that leads to current vaccine failure. Well, yes, it seems that has already happened. And at Spiked, Brendan O'Neill asks, who will call out COVID's prophets of doom? The experts who said Freedom Day, that was July the 19th, would be a disaster were catastrophically wrong, but apparently actions don't have consequences. Pointing out the errors made by lockdown skeptics has become the favorite sport of the chattering classes. It sometimes has the whiff of a blood sport. Every time Sunitra Gupta or Carol Sikora pops up on Radio 4 or makes a comment in a national newspaper, an army of little Stalins goes wild. These people got things wrong about the virus, they cry. Stop platforming them. These experts will never escape the mistakes and misjudgments they made about COVID-19. There will always be a shrill finger pointer there to remind them and to accuse them of killing people with their disinformation. And yet the same thing hasn't been done to the experts who were catastrophically wrong about Freedom Day, to the sage and indie sage types who told us that opening up July 19th would cause mayhem and death on a terrible scale, to those epidemiologists who are never off Channel 4 and the BBC and who branded Freedom Day a dangerous, unethical experiment that posed a threat to the entire world, no less. There are no demands for these people to be cast out, kept off the airwaves, asphyxiated of the oxygen of publicity. And yeah, let's talk about some figures. I believe I can talk about figures here, official figures. I think that's still allowed, although Alex Berenson has certainly got in enough trouble for it. Berenson has not posted to Twitter since, I believe, July the 30th, and there are some people suggesting that he has been banned from Twitter, although I don't see any evidence of that. It could be that he's simply publishing entirely on Substack because of a fear that the next tweet that he could make could lead to a permanent ban from Twitter. So discretion being the better part of valor. William Briggs, a statistician to the stars, says, well, he talks about the figures. Dreaded Delta bows to Alpha, cult of certain death, cult of the mask, propaganda bots, model insanity, more. The New York Times and the Washington Post, no less, have been some pretty disquieting figures that they have published about people who are fully vaccinated, who have been being infected with COVID-19, which apparently is the fault of people who are not vaccinated. Now, this makes no sense whatsoever, but that's what they're going with. Because, I don't know, they can get, I suppose people like to be bullied now. But you can see how the Delta variant has been hyped from the very beginning. It was also the people were cheering for it because it proves just how serious the situation is. And that's the most important thing. Lies aplenty. Here's a screenshot for when Twitter censors delete the original, showing lying is now official policy. I just left the ER. We are officially back to getting crushed by COVID-19. Delta variant is running rampant, and it's much more transmissible than the original virus. 99% of our ICU admits did not receive a vaccine. You're going to go with that, are you? This appears to originate from a man allegedly called Dr. Sam Galley, MD. And it's repeated dozens and dozens of times, word for word, by other Twitter accounts. How about that, huh? How about that? The numbers, daily tests from Johns Hopkins have spiked. The dreaded Delta panic is still working, testing now up to 1.5 million a day. We know it's a testemic and not a pandemic because deaths aren't following. Since the UK got the dreaded Delta before we did and has a similar vaccine strategy, will likely follow behind their curve. And here are their cases. And, bodies stacked like cordwood has not happened. Leaked data suggest vast numbers are being classed as hospitalized by COVID-19 when they were admitted with other ailments, with the virus picked up by routine testing. Yes, that's a reminder that hospitals are one of the most dangerous places on Earth. And let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, or dailyskeptic.org, as it is called now. Experts question number 10's plan to vaccinate 16 and 17-year-olds. How long before they're going to be giving the jab to babies in the womb? Now, almost 80% of 16 to 24-year-olds in England have COVID antibodies. Almost 94% of people in England have COVID antibodies overall, which experts say is highly reassuring and suggests most adults have COVID protection. Long-lasting COVID systems are rare in children, according to BBC News. Are COVID restrictions the new TSA? Richard Hanania highlights the worrying parallels between the government reactions to 9/11 and COVID, and why some people might be permanently masked. Oh, I can just, I don't know whether I'll still be alive when these children who've been masked from the age of 6 months or whatever start to go on a killing spree in 15 or 20 years. The war on breathing, we should be wary of a morality forged by fear, says Laura Dodsworth in The Spectator. And a reminder, I will be reviewing her book on the book club soon enough. Lockdown skeptic Toby Young says Australia's zero COVID policy has been, quote, an absolute disaster. Only 15.5% of the population has been double jabbed, which is why they're reacting in this completely hysterical way. Latest Imperial React report finds vaccine effectiveness could be as low as 22%, and under 64s are at greater risk of hospitalization than before the vaccines. Again, this is a report from round 13 of Imperial College React 1 COVID infection survey, which was published yesterday, covering the period from June the 24th to July the 12th, broadly corresponding to the Delta surge. The press release led with the claim that double vaccinated people were 3 times less likely than unvaccinated people to test positive for the coronavirus. This is clearly misleading as an indication of vaccine effectiveness, however, as young people were both less likely to be vaccinated and more likely to test positive. As the report itself admits, these estimates conflate the effect of vaccination with other correlated variables such as age, which is strongly associated with likelihood of having been vaccinated and also acts as a proxy for differences in behavior across the age groups. 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to get COVID vaccine without parental consent. Well, I suppose they can change their sexes without parental consent, despite being minors. So what can't they do? Japan names and shames quarantine rule breakers. More than 220,000 under 18s in England have already been jabbed. And let's see if Alex Berenson has anything new up at Substack. Here's a piece from August the 3rd. I believe I talked about this yesterday. Israel has gone back to being more transparent, and the new data are now too bad not to highlight. Yes, I did talk about that yesterday, and you can find this at alexberenson.substack.com. Oh, here's an update. As my Twitter suspension runs out, I'm considering how to keep these censors happy. Facts about unicorns, everything you wanted to know about. Expect lots of unicorn pictures. Unicorns are as real as, yeah, I'm not going to repeat that. Also very pretty. See you in 2 days, Jack. Yes. He says, because of your support, their desperate efforts to cancel me have failed, but make no mistake, they're going to keep trying. Speaking of which, Ken Burns, the documentarian, is such an odd-looking man with that obviously dyed hair. What is he, 70 years old or something? And that sort of quasi-beard. A very feminine affect. And he's gone nuts. This is from Warner Todd Houston at Breitbart. Left-wing documentary filmmaker Ken Burns went from praising failed Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams to reportedly blasting Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg as a, quote, enemy of the state who, quote, should be in jail during an interview Monday. The maker of famed PBS documentary The Civil War railed against the Facebook chief executive during an interview with angry lesbian dwarf Kara Swisher on August the 2nd, according to the Wrap. While praising losing Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, one of the woke left's more recent idols, Burns veered toward an attack on Zuckerberg, saying Abrams is the real deal as an activist, but I hope Zuckerberg is in jail by then. This is an enemy of the state, and I mean the United States of America. He doesn't give a shit about us, the United States. He knows he can transcend it. He can get away to any place, and it's so just about filthy lucre. That's it. Burns also slammed Facebook's chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. These people, and Sheryl is complicit, the Nuremberg of this, if it ever happens, which it won't, will be pretty interesting. The way we've been able to temporize and say, oh, it's okay. We'll just go a little bit further. Yes, of course, it is the people who want to shut down all opposing views are the people who are, they are really the champions of democracy, the champions of freedom. Speaking of which, let's return to Hilar Belloc's The Servile State, the rise of wage slavery. There can be, and he begins by talking about the minimum wage, which was about to be introduced in Britain at the time that the book was first published in 1912. Belloc writes, there can be little doubt that trade by trade the principle will extend. For instance, the 2.5 million now guaranteed against unemployment are guaranteed against it for a certain weekly sum. That weekly sum must bear some relation to their estimated earnings when they are in employment. It's a short step from the calculation of unemployment benefit. It's being fixed by statute at a certain level, and that level determined by something which is regarded as the just remuneration of labor in that trade. It is a short step, I say, from that to a statutory fixing of the sums paid during employment. The state says to the serf, I saw to it that you should have so much when you were unemployed. I find that in some rare cases, my arrangement leads to your getting more when you are unemployed than when you are employed. I further find that in many cases, though you get more when you are unemployed, yet the difference is not sufficient to tempt a lazy man to work or to make him take any particular trouble to get work. I must see to this. The provision of a fixed schedule during unemployment thus inevitably leads to the examination, the defining, and at last the imposition of a minimum wage during employment, and every compulsory provision for unemployment benefits is the seed of a minimum wage. Of still greater effect is the mere presence of state regulation in such a matter. The fact that the state has begun to gather statistics of wages over these large areas of industry, and to do so not for a mere statistical object, but a practical one, and the fact that the state has begun to immix the action of positive law and constraint with the older system of free bargaining mean that the whole weight of its influence is now favoring of regulation. It is no rash prophecy to assert that in the near future our industrial society will see a gradually extending area of industry in from which two sides the fixing of wages by statutes shall appear. From the one side, it will come in the form of the state examining the conditions of labor in connection with its own schemes for establishing sufficiency and security by insurance. From the other side, it will come through the reasonable proposals to make contracts between groups of labor and groups of capital enforceable in the courts. So much then for the principle of the minimum wage. It has already appeared in our laws. It is certain to spread. But how does the presence of this introduction of a minimum form part of the advance towards the servile state? I've said that the principle of the minimum wage involves as its converse the principle of compulsory labor. Indeed, most of the importance which the principle of a minimum wage has for this inquiry lies in that converse necessity of compulsory labor which it involves. But as the connection between the two may not be clear at first sight, we must do more than take it for granted. We must establish it by process of reason. There are two distinct forms in which the whole policy of enforcing security and sufficiency by law for the proletariat produce a corresponding policy of compulsory labor. The first of these forms is the compulsion which the courts will exercise upon either of the parties concerned in the giving and in the receiving of the minimum wage. The second form is the necessity under which society will find itself when once the principle of the minimum wage is conceded, coupled with the principle of sufficiency and security to maintain those whom the minimum wage excludes from that area of normal employment. And I'll have more from the servile state tomorrow. This is Hate Hungary Week because a memo went out. Anne Applebaum got one. David Frum got one. Hungary, just such a terrible, terrible, terrible person. And Orban, so corrupt. This is Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The Hungarian government has informed the European Union that it has no business telling Hungarians how to raise their kids following the globalist body's interference over the teaching of alphabet people issues in schools. A law passed by Hungary's National Assembly last month ensured that sex education in schools must not be aimed at promoting homosexuality or changing gender, according to ruling party Fidesz. The law also bans showing children under the age of 18 material related to homosexuality or transgenderism on television, movies, or advertisements. This triggered the unelected European Commission, which launched 2 infringement procedures against the law, while the leaders of the EU's 17 biggest countries reacted by penning a letter arguing the legislation represented a violation of fundamental rights. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also labeled the law a disgrace, claiming it uses the protection of children as an excuse to discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation. How is it that people are still using and getting away using those weasel words, sexual orientation? This orientation is trivial. It is the actions that people commit that are important. Judith Varga tweeted, Hungary has been attacked on an unprecedented scale only because the protection of children and families is our priority. And in view of this, we are unwilling to let alphabet people lobby in our schools and our kindergartens. Bravo, Hungary. I see that Matt Damon is in trouble because he supposedly used a word. Yes, not the one with 6 letters, the one with 3 letters. The story goes that supposedly some video was about to come out with Matt and his buddies, I suppose, using this word in the way that it used to be used to describe weak people or silly people or whatever. And so he gave a extraordinary interview in which he talks about how his daughter hipped him to all of the damage that he was committing using this word in a humorous way, because it just I don't know, it's like that other word that it causes people to either burst into tears or fly into a murderous frenzy. Oh, and of course we all need to know Billy Eichner's opinion on this. I want to know what word Matt Damon has replaced that word, the 6-letter version of that word, with. How about Billy's? I think that would be appropriate. I mean, how anyone can look at Billy Eichner and not understand that physiognomy is real. is a genuine mystery to me. Another person who's in big trouble is Andrew Napolitano, the erstwhile judge and legal commentator on Fox News. He's been sacked because of accusations of homosexual abuse have been leveled against him. I have read a description of supposedly the sort of things that Andrew Napolitano gets up to, and I'm not going to repeat it to you because it is so shocking and disgusting. But if you want to, you can find it at Crazy Days and Nights or in the AGC Gossip, which puts together a bunch of different sites on one site. It's more efficient to get it from there. And yeah, we're talking about porn for children now. Yeah, really, porn for children. They need to be taught about it. Responsible usage. Richard Dawkins. Yes. Let's see. This is a piece from Unheard, and it is by Mary Harrington. And she mentioned something. It's funny. I was talking about this just last night about Velázquez's masterpiece, The Rokeby Venus, and how a Canadian suffragette hacked at it with a butcher knife. And she gave several versions of why she did this, one of which was, I've tried to destroy the picture of the most beautiful woman in mythological history as a protest against the government for destroying Mrs. Pankhurst, who is the most beautiful character in modern history. She gave another version of this story, which I think is liable to be more true. She said that she couldn't stand the way that everyday men came into the National Gallery and looked at the painting. Yes, she just didn't like that one little bit. So let's check and see where we are. In 1998, the West Midlands Police Paedophile and Pornography Unit mounted a doomed court case against the University of Central England for displaying 2 so-called obscene photos by Robert Mapplethorpe. Fast forward another decade and a half, and the convergence was still more advanced. Paul McCarthy's installation, WS, featured a half-dressed Snow White in what looks a great deal like the early stages of a gangbang with the Seven Dwarfs. A couple years later, performance artist Emma Sulkowicz appeared in This Is Not a Rape. This 8-minute video recorded Sulkowicz having sex with an anonymous actor in scenes that appeared to begin consensually, but ended in what looked like non-consensual anal rape. If you drunk the 20th century boundary pushing Kool-Aid, either as an artist or a pornographer, or like Emma Sulkowicz, both, there's no reason why this all shouldn't be fine. And there are plenty for whom pushing everyone's boundaries on acceptable levels of explicit sexual imagery seems not just to be an acceptable part of culture, but something more like evangelism. Back in 2015, Richard Dawkins of Evil Memory suggested that we might beam erotic videos to theocracies, seemingly on the assumption that viewing porn would help such benighted places break out of their hidebound superstitions. The Israelis were doing this in the 1990s, sending, bombarding Palestine with this kind of stuff. I don't know whether they're still doing it. It's obvious that it doesn't work. And just last week, nepotism enjoyer and liberal arch troll Flora Gill tweeted that we should produce entry-level porn for children. This suggestion, though roundly condemned and swiftly deleted, nonetheless reappeared a few days later for a debate on Women's Hour, suggesting an elite Overton window just itching to sidle ever further in the direction of porn as a moral crusade. Well, as I've stated previously, I think that sex education inevitably leads to pedophilia. I don't know how anyone could deny that. A couple of pieces from American Greatness and Unheard that I will talk about tomorrow. But instead, let's talk about music. Before we do that, let's go back to the chat. Uh, Burke and Sultanoff doesn't seem to like most women, calling them energy vampires. Okay, I do not respond to personal quotations from fembots. They're usually Americans. They said the riots of 2020 actually halted the virus. They really made this argument. Haha, says Oscar Toe. Emma Nimpton says the Floyd riots was when I realized it was all BS. Well, yeah, you can't have a super spreader event when people are protesting social injustice. Come on. That is, you learn that in biology 101, right? Okay. Kissin has an okay-ish YouTube channel called Triggerometry. Jaakko Rapala, our Finnish friend, writes, they're like the comedy wing of the intellectual dark web with Brett Weinstein, etc. as guests, so lots of useless classical liberalism. But yeah, useless classical liberalism. When I don't know why I was so disappointed at the hysteria coming from Claire Lehman. I suppose it could be just that she's a good-looking woman, and I have a natural bias towards good-looking women. I'll just describe it to that. William Hicks says affordable housing means the borrower has the income to make the payment on the mortgage. Home ownership means the people who live in the house are still employed and current on the payments. 4 years, affordable housing was the claimed objective when the market crashed in 2008 and housing became as affordable as anyone could have hoped. The polls did whatever it took to reflate prices. Yeah, certainly happened in Canada, where Stephen Harper decided to allow American mortgage companies to operate here. People who would not have been approved for mortgages were suddenly approved for mortgages. And of course, the price of houses was bid up tremendously. The houses, of course, are now seen as, they're not seen as machines for living. They're seen as ATMs. So to the people who own housing, anything which leads to higher housing prices is good, regardless that it means that people are not going to be able to buy houses anymore. They've got their share, so that's all that counts. Red Devil's Advocate says, where do you get the ideas for your streams? I go through an enormous amount of stories and essays every day. It's just as simple as that. Yo Mama, well, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. So I want to talk about never trust anyone, any rock musician over 30. And I know that I've upset some people over this. I simplified my argument. I don't mean that, people using amplified instruments and playing syncopated music, that no one over 30 can do this, but there are problems. And I'll go back to an essay I wrote about this some years ago for the American Spectator. Arise, Sir Michael. Mick Jagger was knighted Friday, joining Sir Elton and Sir Paul. Some conservatives grumbled, including Keith Richards, seemingly under the impression his musical partner had been raised to the peerage. I don't want to step out on stage with someone wearing a coronet and sporting the old ermine. Mick, as usual, had the last word. I don't really think the establishment as we knew it exists anymore. No, it doesn't, but neither does rock and roll. Sir Mick, of course, was once part of the anti-establishment. In 1967, incited by Britain's gutter press, he and Keith were busted for drugs and sentenced to prison under circumstances so dubious that even the then August Times of London objected. The convictions were later overturned, but the prosecution certainly manifested the public will. Mick and Keith, in their music, in their dress, in their lifestyle, as the new usage had it, had outraged a nation. A decade later, however, when a heroin-addicted Keith was busted fair and square in Toronto, few sought to make an example of him or the Rolling Stones. Mores had changed, but it was not as if the British public was no longer capable of outrage. The Sex Pistols released God Save the Queen in 1977, and they were banned, beaten, and blacklisted in response. When the song reached number 1, that space was left vacant on the charts. When Elvis Presley died that year, Sex Pistols singer Johnny Rotten sneered, "It should have been Mick Jagger." From Devil Incarnate to Old Fart in 10 years, Jagger was all of 34 years old in 1977. At 60, and of course he's much older than 60 now, he is still the Little Red Rooster. Keith Richards lives quietly in the country, attends church, and is still married to the same woman after 20 years. But Mick is still fornicating up a storm, dumping his wife of 18 years after caddishly claiming they'd never married, and siring children with women younger than his own. Sir Michael Jagger, Knight Bachelor, has wealth, fame, honors, rude good health, hot and cold running chicks, satisfaction indeed. So why doesn't Mick look satisfied? In his book, Rock Till You Drop, The Decline from Rebellion to Nostalgia, John Straussbaugh declared, "Rock should not be played by 55-year-old men with triple chins bearing bad wig hats, pretending still to be excited about playing songs they wrote 30 or 35 years ago and have played thousands of times since." Why not? According to Straussbaugh, rock is youth music. It is best played by young people for young people in a setting that is specifically exclusionary of their parents and anyone their parents' age. Or, as Pete Townsend famously declared, "Hope I die before I get old." Straussbaugh quotes the novelist Will Self, who avers that rock is a teenage art form, but this cannot be taken literally. After all, both John Lennon and Paul McCartney were already out of their teens when they recorded Love Me Do in 1962. So how old is too old to rock? In his review of the Beatles songbook, Revolution in the Head, the late critic Ian MacDonald noted in passing that the quality of rock music declines precipitously after its creators turned 30. I thought this too harsh a judgment until I cross-checked the rockers with their birth dates in the All Music Guide. Mick and Keith turned 30 in 1973, the year, not coincidentally, of Goat's Head Soup, the Stones' last good album. Paul McCartney turned 30 in 1972, 1 year before his last decent album, Band on the Run. John McCartney turned 30 in 1970, last decent album, Plastic Ono Band, 1970. Bob Dylan, born in 1941, last decent, New Morning, 1970. Lou Reed, born in 1942, last good, Transformer, 1972. Rod Stewart, born in 1945, last decent, A Night in the Town, 1976. Pete Townsend, born in 1945, last good, Quadrophenia, 1973. Iggy Pop, born in 1947, last good album was Lust for Life, 1977. Elvis Costello, born in 1955, his last good album was Blood and Chocolate in 1986. Prince, born in 1958, his last good album was Sign of the Times in 1987. Bono of U2, born in 1960, last decent Achtung Baby, 1991. Michael Stipe of REM, born in 1960, last good Automatic for the People, 1992. Try any name you like. The 30-year rule is pretty much an iron law. The only escape is early death, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Ian Curtis, Kurt Cobain, or insanity, Sly Stone, or Syd Barrett. The Stones remain the largest concert draw in the world, and Mick, even at 60, still tapeworm thin, has the stamina on stage and in the boudoir of a teenager. But his millions of fans are not interested in hearing any but a handful of the songs that appear on the 20 records Mick has made in the last 3 decades. And that includes the millions of fans not yet born when Mick turned 30. Rock music is youth music, and Mick Jagger has been kicking against the pricks for an awfully long time. No gong from Prince Charles can give him back his youth, and he knows it. In the list, which I just read, I may have been a little too tough on some of those people. But, you look at someone like Iggy Pop, this search and destroy and this sort of thing. Those sort of sentiments sound ridiculous coming out of the mouth of, someone who's over 30 years old. You look at the situations that so many of these people are in, that, I have to get a record contract. I want the whole world to hear me. I want the whole world to hear my truth, because I have so much to teach the world and what's wrong with it. And then, I don't know, 10 years after your first record comes out, your biggest problem in the world is that you want to add a tennis court or a swimming pool to your country estate, and the local council won't let you. Or, when you're singing about baby, 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 how much I love baby, 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 and you're on wife number what? And, the count of women that you have been with is in the hundreds, such that, you don't even know their names. Or just the kind of, the crushing realities of the music business, that so many managers are not only perverts, but crooks. And there's a bunch of people who work for record companies who sit at desks all day long, and somehow they think they deserve the profits from your recordings more than you do for some reason. And apparently this is accepted, and, they get away with it. Oh, your last album was an enormous hit. You know what we're going to do? I mean, this happened to Moby after that big album that he had a few years ago. It sold 10 million copies or something. Play, it was called, I think. So, and he makes his own records. His records don't cost very much. But Virgin Records decides, no, we are going to micromanage your next record, because you can't be trusted to make hit records. Well, I guess your last one sold 10 million, but I guess that was a fluke. I mean, there's people who are still, I suppose, rock music has has been consumed entirely by nostalgia, as John Strasbaugh wrote. And this piece that I'm reading from came out 18 years ago. Now, the fact that the Rolling Stones are about to go on tour again, I don't know whether I would have predicted that. I don't know that I would have predicted that, well, Keith Richards and Charlie Watts and Ron Wood would still be alive. Nobody lives forever, as they say. But as David Mamet joked, Frank Sinatra gave it a shot. And Mick Jagger seems to be giving it a shot as well. Why do people go to see the Rolling Stones? I suppose because they are the most famous name. And, well, this could be the last concert, but you could have said that of any, concert series by the Rolling Stones for a long time now. And again, we're going to play this song for the 702nd time. And, of course, one of the things I find so amusing about the Rolling Stones is, despite the many thousands of concerts, they're just so ramshackle. Like it seems to take Keith Richards to get up to song number 3 or number 4 before he seems to understand that he's actually playing live on stage. People used to mock the Faces for being ramshackle, but no, I think that the Stones are just as ramshackle. But I don't know. Mick Jagger has the kind of fame that there are people in the future going to have that kind of fame. It's a serious question. Oh, yes, Instagram influencers with their millions of followers. Well, these Instagram influences are important, or at least briefly, to the people who follow them. No one else in the world knows who they are. And given how quickly fashions change and how the internet induces disgust with fame, most of these influencers on Instagram are going to be completely forgotten by their fans shortly. Does anyone think that people are going to be listening to Ariana, the amusingly named Ariana Grande, in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years' time? No, I don't think so. And again, Mick Jagger has been famous since 1964 and 1965, which is a very long time. But rock and roll was supposed to be revolutionary, supposed to be anti-conservative, but you see this respect for age, this respect for experience that has come about. It's very amusing to me. I must say, I didn't put David Bowie on my list, but you notice that in the 1980s, he went through a really barren patch. Just let me check this out. So he was born in 1947. He was 16 years old when his first record came out. So the stuff that he did in the 80s after his big hit album, Let's Dance, and so 47 to 77, 36. Okay. 36 years old when Let's Dance came out, and he didn't really make a good album all the way through for a long time after that. And I think part of the reason that he didn't is because, the kinds of attitudes that one strike as a youth, they can't be kept up. And one of the reasons for that is, and, I think that people will recognize this, especially the men who are listening, that you look back when you were younger, that there were things that you would have said or did that you would be shy of doing today, or you'd be horrified by the thought, because the older you get, the more you start to think, is this going to embarrass me? Am I going to be humiliated? Just a grand vision like Ziggy Stardust say. I mean, this seems a lot more impressive, when you're younger. I suppose when you grow older, you can think that it's kind of stupid, really. I think it's glorious, but that's the sort of thing that young people are capable of doing. So, David Bowie and his, after he got sick, after he had a heart attack on stage, he stopped touring. He stopped touring entirely, which made him in many ways a more desirable figure. He made some guest appearances. I like the one he did with David Gilmour, where he was singing Arnold Lane. That was very pleasing to see. And then his albums became more consciously arty, which I suppose is the sort of thing that you can get away with when you are as famous and respected as David Bowie. But I think he came to feel in his final years, I don't need to prove anything to anybody. And he was very clever in buying back his catalog, both the songs themselves and the mechanical recordings. And as I've mentioned before, it is really impressive how much money you can make in the music business when it's not being stolen from you. So Bowie worked in secret with Tony Visconti, on The Next Day and Black Star. And I think he came to terms with the fact of, that he was an old man working in a genre, not exactly in the same way, but working in a genre for young people. Oscar Toe says, can't stop laughing at Obama liking Pearl Jam. Were they on any of this fake playlists that they're always publishing? Don Willis said Steely Dan did nothing wrong. Well, Steely Dan stopped making records, in 1980? Right? Of course, Walter Becker had a huge drug problem. So Steely Dan made a comeback some years after the original duo split. And they made 2 records? And then they packed it in again? That is, they packed in writing original material. And I suppose, for a lot of these people, it's just they only have so much in them. Of course, Steely Dan then went on an endless tour. But of course, they could get, hire younger musicians for the furious rock licks, And again, I mean, a band as, as respected as they are, I mean, they have the luxury of going on tour, where people will be excited to hear their deep cuts. There's no such thing as deep cuts anymore because the album has disappeared. And I don't really think that Music now seems to be, what the Germans call occasion music. People aren't listening to it because it's not meant to be listened to. Outgrowing rebelliousness is the acceptance of mediocrity, says Brandon Smith. Red Devil's Advocate says, would you rather the human race goes extinct and the earth survives, or vice versa? What? That's a pretty big question. They're ever going to live anywhere except on Earth. I could be proved wrong about it, but just the amount of energy inputs, as Tainter would put it, that would be required is just unthinkable, given that we can barely sustain civilization with an increasing number of energy inputs. Brandon Smith says, first you get comfortable, then you die a slow death on the inside. I remember Peter Blakevad, who's still making music, 50 years or so after his first record came out? But he changed his musical style completely in the 1980s. Compressed narrative in rhyme, or roots music, some people call it. Virgin Records thought that they were going to make a star out of him on Peter Gabriel level. And they got Peter Gabriel's producer in to make a record, which is just, it's all samplers and synthesizers, and there's hardly any acoustic sounds on it. David Lohr is the name of the producer. It just, producing just reached a nadir in the 1980s. Oh, everything is on this keyboard. We don't need anyone else. We got the keyboard here with all the samples. I don't think the Stones are satanic enough for the Super Bowl anymore. Of course, I saw them play at the Super Bowl, and I, enjoyed it. But it just seems it's like an odd place, for a band like that to be. So what else do we have in the chat? Two Against Nature was first album in 20 years, says Don Willis. Oscar Toe says, is different with different arts, though writers sometimes pull off their greatest works when they are old. This is true. This is true, indeed. But I mean, if you look at popular music, the types of forms, there aren't that many of them. So how many times are you going to write the same thing? I mean, leave aside the lyrical content. Peter Blakevad wrote that one of the records he made for Virgin, the record company was pushing him for a love song. And he said or thought to himself, that's kid stuff. Well, at least the way that, love has traditionally been expressed in popular music, by rock and roll bands. It's kid stuff. I mean, a song like Carole King and Jerry Geffen's Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? That's a very sophisticated song. But, they were brill building. They were professional songwriters. I mean, it was the same tradition as, the Gershwin brothers. Jeffrey Pye says Black Star was quite a way to leave the world. Yes, I agree. Nothing to prove. Totally comfortable, and I think it works mostly quite well. As do I. Brandon Smith says Randy Newman had a compelling musical style for a weirdo. I like the movies that the records that he made in the 1970s quite a bit. And the one with the big hit, I Love L.A. on it. But then, I guess it was easy for him to write songs for movies than to make rock albums. Randy Newman's kind of a sad story. I suppose he's comfortable enough. But those songs that he wrote and were recorded by all these different people in the 1960s, doesn't get a penny from them. Doesn't get a penny. And the lesson is keep your publishing, kids. If you believe in yourself, keep your publishing. Birkin Sultanov says, I prefer Joy Division and The Cure. Well, I mean, Joy Division ended when Ian Curtis killed himself in 1980. And then there was, New Order continued. And I don't know, that's kind of sad now, isn't it? I know the record company Factory Records went bust and all that, but still treading the boards, even though, they've lost their bass player who was integral to their sound. I mean, look at the Who. Keith Moon dies, and they bring in Kenny Jones, and Kenny Jones is a great drummer. And then John Entwistle dies, so you're going to have the Who without Entwistle and Moon. How much do you need money, Pete? I love the Cure's Siamese Twins, says Oscar Toe, as do I. New Order had some great music in the 80s, says Metal Mike. I would agree. Also great album covers as well. So it's 6 o'clock. Time to wrap it up. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be discussing a film from 3 years ago called Under the Silver Lake, which is about Los Angeles and conspiracy theories, directed by David Robert Mitchell. A week after that, I'm going to be talking about the Archer's classic, The Red Shoes, which is the greatest movie ever made about art. Yeah, probably. On August the 19th, I'm going to talk about a movie about an old man and his dog. It's from 1952 by Vittorio De Sica, and it's called Umberto D. A war movie about the Pacific, directed by John Ford, starring John Wayne, from 1945. They Were Expendable. And after the urgings of the chat, I got a hold of the Milius documentary by Figueroa and Knudsen from 2013. And I love the movie, I suppose, because I love John Milius. So I'm going to be talking about that on September the 2nd. On the book club, I'm going to be talking about Lafcadio Hearn and his Japanese tales, his many attempts to explain Japan to Western observers. August the 13th, Laura Dodsworth's A State of Fear. August the 20th, Theodore Dalrymple's Romancing Opiates. August the 27th, Francis Ween's Karl Marx. And on September 3rd, Welcome to Hell by Bad Billy Pratt. And on August the 9th, I'm going to be talking on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about Anton Bruckner, The Genius as Peasant. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. If you like the show or any part of it, I would also appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, how pitiable do I want to get here? I really could use donations. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.